George Kέντας, Γιώργος in Greek, George Kέντας, is one of the founding members of the Επίκουρος think tank. He's a member of the board of directors, and he's an assistant professor of international politics at the University of Nicosia. And at the same time, a coordinator of the BA program in European Studies and International Relations, and the MA program in Public Administration. He's also affiliated, as I said before, with the Egyptian think tank, and he's the head of the research committee on governance and institutions. And he's doing a great job, I must say.
Good.
He has published on international relations, European studies, and the Cyprus problem. I can tell you he's on the mass media very, very regularly, and he's a very well-known figure. He may not like me saying this, but I have to say. His latest book is about the chapter of security in Cyprus negotiations. Recently, he turned his research interest in the area of energy security. Mr. George Kέντας.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here, and especially to see Daniel back to Cyprus. We had a great time, and we had the honor to have him when we actually launched the institution. And his contribution was essential, I must say, to the growing of our understanding about the region. So I have a written talk. I will follow what I've written. It was a long day for me as well, having all these obligations, coordinating two programs at the University of Nicosia, having all these students and administration. So I would like to welcome you all to Cyprus. I trust that you will enjoy your presence on the island and make the best out of your mission here. As you can see, the weather looks great, and I come here in the area every Friday, and I swim around here. So if you want to try it, the water temperature is great. So if you have the opportunity to do that, you will remember what I told you about. Okay, so let me begin my talk tonight with some methodological notes which I find important for what follows. First of all, as you can see in the program, the title of my speech is Cyprus in a New Constellation, Greece, Turkey and Israel. I tend to talk more about what I see as an emerging relationship between Cyprus and Israel, two neighboring countries that unfortunately used to pay very little attention or even ignoring one another for a long time. Regarding Greece and Turkey, I will make some references in passing. I believe that Ambassador Jonis will be here on Friday, and Dr. Dr will be here on Saturday. We'll brief you and elaborate further on the Greek and Turkish angle from that. As a preliminary remark on my first point, I need to note that the period of mutual ignorance between Cyprus and Israel came to an end in early 1990s, and the bilateral relationship took a new turn in the first decade of 2000. As I will mention in a moment, the first 3 years of the second decade of the new millennium revealed the great potentials of a strategic cooperation between Israel and Cyprus. Many people see that relationship to take the form of a strategic alliance. According to Benny Morris, a professor of history in the Middle East Studies Department of Ben Gurion University, Cyprus-Israel relationship develops into a strong alliance. There are different views about the relationship between the two countries. I asked many people, Israelis and Cypriots, to present me with a definition of the relationship. Their views conjoin to the point that the relationship is in its best shape. Let me clarify what I mean with the concept of emerging relationship. That is, why I see the relationship between Israel and Cyprus as an emerging one. The origin of that concept is philosophical, but its implications are quite substantial. From a philosophical standpoint, the bilateral relationship between the two countries is emerging because it entails some real potentials which are unknown and or unexplored by the two countries and their people. These potentials are real, still not all of them are visible to the two countries. That philosophical perspective is premised on two substantial lines of analysis. Firstly, both in terms of tangible results and in terms of genuine intentions, the two countries seem eager to explore and materialize the potentials of their relationship to their best interest. I shall refer to a number of examples that manifest that trend. There is a second substantial reason for viewing that relationship as an emerging one. This time the evidence comes from third parties, that is countries, international regional organizations, research institutions, think tanks, corporate actors and the like, who argue that the two countries have real potentials to develop their relationship further. In sum, the relationship between Cyprus and Israel is an emerging reality that has substantial implications for regional and international politics. The second methodological point of my talk concerns the validity of the overall evidence and analysis I shall present. Apart from a systematic research on the emerging relationship between Israel and Cyprus, I pursued some field work in terms of background conversations with diplomats, bureaucrats, and academics of the two countries. Due to limited resources and time constraints, of course, I talked more to Cypriots than to Israelis, but I intend to further that research. The bottom line is that there is a growing convergence with regard to Cypriot and Israeli perceptions about the emerging relationship between the two countries. It's a new relationship on the making with mutual eagerness to shape it to the best interest of the two countries. What is needed is extended and systematic dialogue with the aim of better understanding one another. The final remark I would like to make on methodology concerns the questions I plan to answer tonight. My intention is to shed some light on the following. What is the state of the bilateral relationship? What does Cyprus and Israel expect, need from one another? What can they do together? What they need to bear in mind about one another? I believe I said enough about methodological caveats. I shall move into the substance of my talk. The first thing I would like to discuss is the state of the bilateral relationship. I asked a number of people to point to a historical event or contingency that marked the new era in the relationship between the two countries. I received many answers. My personal view may be summarized as follows. There are a number of crucial moments in the history of the relationship between Israel and Cyprus that date back to ancient times and become more intensive in the 20th century, especially in the aftermath of World War II. Between 1946 and 1949, during the period when Jewish Holocaust survivors were trying to reach Mandate Palestine, some 53,000 Jews were detained by Britain, the colonial ruler, on the island. Those people were treated with comfort and solidarity by Cypriots. It's worth noting that some 2,000 babies were born on the island during the same period. These memories are strongly embedded in the collective memory of hundreds of families in Israel. 1 year after the declaration of independence in Cyprus in 1961, Israel opened an embassy in Nicosia. Although Israel was interested in an enhanced relationship with Cyprus, Nicosia followed a peculiar foreign policy toward the non-aligned movement and the Arab countries. It took Cyprus 34 years to open an embassy in Israel. The first Cypriot ambassador moved to Tel Aviv in 1994. There are many reasons for that delay, which we may have time to discuss later on. It's worth noting, however, that Cyprus' attitude toward Israel changed due to initiatives of some Cypriot individuals who saw the great potential of a relationship with Israel. At this point, I would like to stress that individual initiative and vision was crucial for the development of that relationship. This is a major element of Cyprus politics that one needs to take seriously to account. I can refer to other examples during the discussion. Let me refer to some facts that reflect the change of attitude in the bilateral relationship. 7 years before Cyprus' independence, the colonial power of the time, the UK, and Israel signed the first agreement on the conversion of airways companies' earnings in sterling British pound. In the first decade after Cyprus' independence, only 2 agreements were signed by the two countries in 1960s. In 1970s, no agreement was signed. In 1980s, only 1 agreement was signed. In 1990s, however, the two countries signed 9 agreements. In the first decade of the new millennium, they signed only 2, but in the first 2 years of the second decade, 2010-2012, they signed 8, and many more are in the process of consultation. It seems that something is changing here. Among these bilateral agreements, a couple of them stand out, such as an agreement of 2010 on mutual consultation between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the two countries that was enhanced with a new protocol in 2011, an agreement between Ministries of Defense in 2012 about mutual protection of classified information, and a memorandum of understanding between the Ministries of Defense regarding defense and military cooperation. There is no doubt that the most important agreement between the two countries was concluded in 2010 and concerned the delimitation of the exclusive economic zone of the two countries. Israel and Cyprus delimited a mutual border, what came to be the most stable and promising border in the Middle East. There is an interesting story behind the way in which the agreement was reached by the individual Cypriot who made the agreement, which I may have the opportunity to tell you afterwards. The meteoric improvement of the relationship between Cyprus and Israel in the last couple of years must have an explanation which is worth pursuing. I believe that we should first need to look for the trigger, the turning point in the bilateral relationship of the two countries. Nobody can deny the fact that the discovery of considerable energy reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean basin sparked the historical momentum. According to the US Geological Survey, the Eastern Mediterranean basin contains 1.7 billion barrels of recoverable oil and 122 trillion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas. According to Fatih Birol, the International Energy Agency chief economist, there is now considerable evidence showing that more than 3 trillion cubic meters of gas is present in the Eastern Mediterranean. Israel was the first state to move fast with offshore exploration, but Cyprus was the first state to pursue comprehensive agreements with its southern neighbors on eliminating economic exclusive zones. An agreement with Egypt was concluded in 2003 and with Lebanon in 2007. Actually, by concluding an agreement with Israel in 2010, Cyprus defined its borders with 3 neighboring countries in the sea. That action set the ground for the de facto delimitation of economic exclusive zone between Lebanon and Israel and Egypt and Israel. The former, the EEZ of Lebanon and Israel, is problematic, but in a course of accommodation. The delimitation of the exclusive economic zone between Cyprus and Israel, however, must not be seen as a trigger of a new phase in their bilateral relationship, but as a follow-up development of the events that preceded that agreement. The events of May 2010 in the Eastern Mediterranean, the well-known Mavi Marmara incident, set the ground for a new era in Cyprus-Israel relations. Nicosia made the right decisions in the right time. Actually, it was the second consecutive year when Nicosia prevented activists from using the soil and ports of Cyprus as transit points to Gaza. My research revealed the background of the 2009 and 2010 decisions of Nicosia. A couple of prudent and forward-looking bureaucrats in Nicosia made the right considerations and channeled the decision-making process of the government in Cyprus. Once more, I would like to stress the crucial role and contribution of individuals in the transformation of foreign policy preferences in Cyprus. The gist of that brief timeline of the bilateral relationship between Cyprus and Israel is that both countries were ready to assume a unique historical opportunity in 2010 in order to further and enhance their relationship. The groundwork of 1990s and discovery of natural resources in Eastern Mediterranean and the common concern with Turkey's revisionist policy in the region set the ground for a new era in the relationship between Israel and Cyprus. The new relationship, which I see as an emerging one, a relationship in the making, is based on solid foundation. In my view, these foundations comprise the following. 1. Shared values. Both countries share the values of what Georg Sorensen defined as a thick liberal order, that is, respect to democracy, human rights, open market economy, and international institutions. Second, predictability. Both in terms of intentions and policy, Israel and Cyprus are 100% predictable with regard to one another. Third, status quo preference. Both states have a strong preference to status quo maintenance in the southeastern Mediterranean. Fourth, peaceful resolution of disputes, refrain from arbitrary use of violence. Both states are committed to the peaceful resolution of regional disputes. Fifth, concern with the revisionist policy of Turkey and its hegemonic intentions. Sixth, intention to exploit natural resources in Eastern Mediterranean in a peaceful way. Seven, Cyprus and Israel are the only non-Muslim states in the region, and they are concerned with violent Islamization. Of course, each state maintains certain priorities and preferences over domestic and foreign policy. In the past, there was very little understanding and dialogue with regard to these areas of divergence. But today, there is better understanding and systematic dialogue on all these issues. My understanding is that Cyprus and Israel are in the process of learning on how to respect the sensitivities of one another and develop their relationship on the areas they share interests. This is a great lesson for both countries. This is maybe the right moment to state that both countries understand quite well now that their relationship with other countries do not and should not be a matter of concern. For as long as the areas of sensitivity are well understood and mutually respected, they may go ahead and do business together unobstructed. For example, sooner or later, the bilateral relationship between Israel and Turkey will be normalized. That normalization, however, should not prevent Israel and Cyprus from furthering their relationship. As I will argue in a moment, there are areas where they are primed to work together. Today, the bilateral relationship between Israel and Cyprus is indeed in its best shape. Dialogue and cooperation extend from law to high politics, from medicine and agriculture to energy and security. Due to time limitations, I opt for a short discussion on two areas of potential strategic cooperation. The one is energy and the other is security. These two issues are intertwined, but I will take them in turn. What I would argue is that Israel and Cyprus must begin considering the establishment of a security community in the Eastern Mediterranean, beginning with energy security. There is a strong potential for bilateral cooperation in the energy sector. There are some technical and political issues that must be addressed, however, before that. In anticipation of the court decision in Israel on whether and how the country will export natural gas, some things may be taken into account. In 2012, the two countries considered the possibility of a so-called interim solution to Cyprus's energy needs. The latter expressed Cyprus an interest in importing natural gas from Israel up until its own gas reserves in Block 12 Aphrodite is developed. That possibility was explored, but no decision was made. Cyprus needs to comply with some EU regulations concerning the use of energy and environment at the national level are urgent. Otherwise, it will face European Commission penalties. For the time being, however, the Israel option does not seem to work, but it was not abandoned completely. A second front of potential cooperation concerns the possible common reserves or deposits across the exclusive economic zones of the two countries. That possibility was considered in 2012-2013, but after an investigation drilling, Israel did not discover a considerable deposit nearby Cyprus's economic exclusive zone that will require an agreement with Nicosia over its co-exploitation. Such a deposit, however, may be discovered in the future. The two countries need to make all necessary preparations, technical and political, so that they will be ready if and when time comes. The most promising potential cooperation between Israel and Cyprus in the energy sector lies in the LNG industry. Cyprus is considers one possible destination of Israel. Cyprus considers one possible destination of Israeli natural gas that will be liquefied and exported to Europe and or Asia. Although the government of Cyprus considers only the LNG option for exploring its natural gas, experts say that Israel may consider, thank you very much.
Very nice.
May consider a number of alternative options. So in Israel, there are a number of options about exporting natural gas, which are the following. These are suggestions by experts, not by the government of Israel. The first option is Cyprus LNG terminal. Second option is a pipeline to Egypt. The third option is a pipeline to the Palestinian Authority. The fourth is a pipeline to Jordan. The fifth, a pipeline to Turkey. Of course, today you may have seen in the news that once more the government of Israel said that that option of the pipeline to Turkey is not considered as an option at all. It is maybe too early to say about these options, but one needs to take into account that this decision will be made by the government of Israel in consultation with the companies which are involved in offshore exploration. These are Noble, Delek, and Avner. To my knowledge, Noble is firmly against the option of Turkey, whereas Delek is strongly in favor of that option. I may come back to that issue during the discussion, of course. Overall, Israel considers its options under the principles of diversity and flexibility without excluding any option at the moment. Let me now turn to the final section of my topic, of my presentation, which is security. I believe that there is a strong potential for forging a regional security community between Cyprus and Israel that may include other states. Daniel said maybe Egypt at some point, and I agree probably, in the spirit of the works of, well-known works of Karl Deutsch and Emmanuel Adler on security communities. Such a community may include any state in the broader region of Eastern Mediterranean with a Pacific disposition and a strong preference to status quo maintenance, peaceful resolution of disputes, and respect of the national security of other states. I don't have the time, of course, to elaborate tonight the idea, but I strongly believe that such a community may be developed between Cyprus, Israel, and Greece at the first stage, and later it may include other states of the region that share the aforementioned principles. The energy sector provides a unique opportunity to develop a security community in the Eastern Mediterranean. A constellation of countries in the Middle East and beyond, including the United States and Russia, have a vested interest in such a community. Let me just note that security communities do not consist in countries with harmony of interest, but countries with a vested interest in maintaining order under shared values and mutual understanding. I believe that the energy sector is a good area to start a security community in the area. Such a security community, however, may take time and a lot of effort to develop, and in the end it may not work. On this account, security concerns of Cyprus and Israel may be addressed in the context of traditional defense and military arrangements. To be sure, this is happening and it develops quite fast. I shall limit my analysis to developments that concern Cyprus and Israel. In the 1990s, Cyprus and Israel failed to accommodate the security concerns of one another, following the traditional doctrine of peripheral policy as conceived in the 1950s by the Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion. Israel pursued a strategic alliance with Turkey. Around the same period of time, in 1990, Cyprus and Greece forged a doctrine of common defense space in view of a common threat by Turkey. In the context of Cyprus-Greece military pact, Nicosia came to an agreement with Russia for the installation in Cyprus of the S-300 anti-ballistic system. At that time, Israel took the side of Turkey and opposed that installation of that system in Cyprus, primarily because the radar of that system would cover areas where Israel used for military exercise. With the demise of the alliance between Israel and Turkey, the former developed a new attitude toward regional security. Actually, today, the ministries of defense of Cyprus and Israel work quite closely. The level of understanding of the security needs of one another is paradigmatic. Let me just refer to one example that shows the depth and breadth of the new military collaboration between the two countries. Israel considers its air force vital for national security. The strength and effectiveness of its national air force is phenomenal. But Israel is concerned with a possible surprise attack by an enemy. In such a case, the national air force cannot and must not stay on the ground, but it cannot stay on the air forever. Overall, Israel maintains 22 airports where military airplanes may be landed in case of a surprise attack. But the security of these airports is not assured. On this account, Israel needs a backup space to land its air force in case of war. And it also needs some airspace to train and prepare its air forces in such a case. To my knowledge, Cyprus is emerging as the only trustworthy partner of Israel for accommodating these needs. Actually, the Air Force of Israel is trained for Cyprus's FIR at least 2 times per month for the last couple of years. The collaboration between the two countries is growing quite fast in the course of time. The question is what Cyprus may expect in turn from Israel. To my knowledge, Israel is eager to sell to Cyprus military equipment and contribute to the training of its military forces. This is a project under construction, if I may say so. As a final remark on the security front, I would just note that military and defense collaboration in the areas of energy, security and intelligence is in a great shape and grows quite fast. In conclusion, I would like to state that the emerging relationship between Cyprus and Israel is a new reality in the region. I believe that both countries have many things to share with and a lot of things to learn from one another. The relationship, however, should not be taken for granted. In international relations, interstate relations go where national interest takes them, and national interest goes where governments take them. On that remark, I would like to conclude my talk and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, George. Excellent presentation. Let me ask you about the non-recognition of Northern Cyprus. As I understand it, this has been the centerpiece of Cypriot diplomacy for 40 years now. And it is the great achievement that no country has recognized the government. By forming a strong bond with Israel, is that not in jeopardy? Is it not likely that Middle Eastern countries will say, well, you've got this bond with Israel, we're going to recognize...
Yes, you're right, but this is a complex issue that relates to a number of other issues in the area. Let me just, of course I cannot include everything in the talk, but I had some briefings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and what they told me is that last year Cyprus made a move which was known by Israel, and what was the move was they upgraded the presence of the Palestinian authority in Cyprus into an embassy. And Cyprus also supported Palestine bid for entrance to the UN General Assembly. And in other forums, Cyprus supports Palestinian authorities. So there is actually the policy of Cyprus towards Palestinians not changed, but I must say that the government of Cyprus is very careful now to understand more and better the sensitivities of Israel. As I said in my presentation, in 2009, because of some individual initiatives, I want to stress that, by some bureaucrats, not government itself, not the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but some bureaucrats in the ministry, the decision was not allow the activists to leave from Cyprus. This was repeated in 2010. So Cyprus emerged as an actor that is able to have a balance between sensitive issues. Of course, you know, the Gaza Strip situation is acceptable to many countries around the world, that it's an area where Hamas controls, and that and the decision of the United Nations panel on that. So I think that Cyprus has nothing to fear from advancing its relationship with Israel. Syria was the only country to attempt that during the years of good personal relationship between Al-Assad and Erdogan. Israel actually established a direct line from Latakia to Famagusta for some time, and this was a means through which illegal immigrants were transferred to Cyprus, to northern Cyprus, and from there to the south. And the government here has a big problem. So
say that again. There was
they brought from Syria illegal immigrants from Syria.
So Syrian smugglers.
Yes.
Syrian.
They smuggled illegal immigrants
Northern Cyprus.
to northern Cyprus, and they came here because the line, the green line, is porous. It's not effectively controlled. A number of Syrian political refugees came to Cyprus, to the areas controlled by the government of Cyprus. But I think that what's essential to see here is another aspect of the relationship between Cyprus and Israel. Cyprus may function as an ad hoc mediator between Israel and other countries in the region, such as Egypt and Lebanon. And to my understanding, this is a role that Cyprus is eager to assume and Israel is eager to support. So maybe Israel may do business with Egypt and maybe Lebanon via Cyprus without direct contact with one another. So in that respect, I think that the countries in the region will not make any move towards recognition of the Tiran Sea. But, as you said in your presentation this afternoon, our region is in flux. And I think that the last thing that countries in the region will consider right now is, normalizing their relationship with Tiran Sea. So this is, overall my intuition, and based on, on the briefings I had this period.
Also, if I may add, it might be of economic interest of Lebanon and Egypt, because now, as you know, the shale gas is coming out from the States, which is going to drop the price of the natural gas on a global scale. So it's better for the countries of the region, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, and Cyprus, to have cheaper LNG in order to supply the world markets. So if, for example, a solution is found and natural gas reaches basically cooperate from the four countries, due to economies of scale, the cost is going to be slashed. So cheaper natural gas, greater profits for the four countries.
But if I may intervene in that point, there are a number of developments around the gas industry. Turkey launched its first shale gas enterprise last month. But actually, now that I have the opportunity to intervene in that, I think it's worth noting here that, to my understanding, Turkey grows into a rogue state in the region. It's not only the agreement with China that concerns the West. Turkey gave a license to a company to import directly from Kurdish Iraq natural gas to Turkey, bypassing Baghdad. Mm-hmm. So this was something that Washington did not like, and Turkey seems to take action, ignoring the interest of the United States in the region and certain balances in the area. So I think that why Turkey is doing all that, because it seems to be not part of the emerging energy reality in the region. So it's Egypt and Cyprus and Greece and Israel and maybe Lebanon at some point. So these 5 actors will work together. Certainly Greece, Israel, and Cyprus will work together. Egypt is going along with them. So Turkey stays out. So the reaction of Erdogan is to provoke, to get the attention of the West, and to get some compromises with that. So this is a strategy that does not pay and brings Turkey into trouble, but the rational actor model cannot explain all that all the time. Yes, sir.
I have an understanding, and I believe I understood this. I was very excited to receive a note before we came from Dr. Pipes about the Prime Minister of Greece and his cabinet that traveled to Israel a week or 2 ago to sign approximately 8 new agreements with Israel, and that was really groundbreaking from my perspective. Dr. Pipes threw a little bit of cold water on that when he explained that before they came to Israel, the Prime Minister of Greece and his cabinet went to Turkey and signed 14 agreements.
Yes.
Can you please talk about that?
Yes, that's a good opportunity to explain some things about Greece. After Papandreou, a legendary political figure in Greece, after he passed away in 1995, 1996, November, and Simides assumed power, Greece retreated from the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. And this was clearly manifested in the context of negotiations for the settlement of the Cyprus problem between 2002 and 2004. Let me just tell you one example which is painful to the Greeks of Cyprus, but it's a reality that we have to face. Maybe things change now, but what I'll say you, it was a sad reality. In the context of security arrangements, which, by the way, my briefings revealed that Israel is today really concerned with any future security arrangements on the island now. During that period of time when they were discussing security arrangements, there was a provision for a new balance in Cyprus between Turkey and Greece. That provision provided that 2 contingents, a Greek and a Turkish contingent, will stay in Cyprus. And the level would be 6,000 soldiers.
This is the Annan plan?
The Annan plan, 6,000 soldiers each. During negotiations in the last phase of negotiations in 2004, Greece clearly announced that it will not be able to fulfill that provision. So what was the solution to that? The Annan plan provided, and as some of us know very well, and it's a common secret, to change the provision and say up to 6,000. So Greece will send here less than 1,000, and Turkey will have 6,000 troops. And of course, the security arrangements of the Annan plan gave Turkey control over Cyprus, and that would make Turkey the new neighbor of Egypt and Israel and Lebanon, of course, in the region. So these arrangements, of course, were not accepted by the Greek Cypriots in the referendum of April 2004, and now we have a new reality. If that plan was accepted, then the energy reality would have been different. And maybe Israel will not have any option right now that it has. But of course, let me tell you that there is some mythology around the potential rapid relationship. I want to be very clear. Some Greek Cypriots believe that Israel will send troops to Cyprus to liberate us from Turkey. But we try to make a moderate analysis and explanation of the limits of that relationship, how far it may go, and that Israel, when it comes to security, it has some sensitivities that we have to understand and respect, and be very clear with it. So it seems that under Samaras administration, Greece considers coming back to the area. Cyprus urged many times Greece to announce together their common border of exclusive economic zones, and Greece renounced that. But it's interesting to see. Maybe Mr. Kasinis will explain you that, and Mr. Jonis also may explain you that, because they are involved. They know technical things better than I know. If I had the maps here, I'll show you. But when Israel announced its exclusive economic zone and areas of exploitation, of potential exploitation in the region that goes beyond Cyprus's exclusive economic zone, it moves in a line that gives a potential to Greece to have borders in the sea with Egypt and Cyprus. And this was in the previous Mubarak administration. So during the Morsi short period of Morsi administration, one person in the administration even thought that they should revisit the agreement with Cyprus. But of course this did not happen. But Turkey, what Turkey does, it goes to Lebanon and Egypt, delegations go there and explain to them that they lost quite a big share of their potential explorations by making an agreement with Cyprus, and it will be in their best interest to make an agreement with Turkey instead of with Cyprus.
Sure.
So, but of course, I think that this did not work, but we don't know if it will work. But for the time being, the agreement with Egypt is stable and in effect. With Israel the same. With Lebanon, there is a problem, as you know. The Lebanese parliament did not ratify the treaty so far, but it's in effect according to international law, independent of the domestic decision. But nevertheless, practically there is no problem with Lebanon. But for sure, with Egypt and Israel, everything seems okay.
In Syria?
In Syria, there was no attempt to eliminate exclusive economic zone. In one of articles I wrote, I suggested that we need to have an open eye towards Syria, be very careful not to take sides before the civil war, is determined. But I agree with your analysis that this will be, this will not end, will go on forever. And I remember that he was one of the first to tell us, was one of the first to hear in Cyprus suggesting that it's a civil war, and it was before even in CNN people were talking about that. Yes.
When you were talking about energy and offshore gas, is that something you're now taking out of the ground and actually getting revenues, or is that something in the future? And second part of the question, if in fact there is a lot of gas and a lot of revenues, is there any way that the northern part of Cyprus will try to claim part of that for themselves and entrench, strengthen their position vis-a-vis the Greek portion?
Okay. Unfortunately, in Cyprus, things are sometimes misunderstood. The most important part of the natural gas enterprise is not well defined in the public debate. They are missing the monetization part, and that's the most important thing, because finding a deposit and discovering natural gas is not enough. You need to develop the field offshore and find a way to exploit it, through a pipeline or through LNG terminal or whatever. What the state of affairs right now is the following. The government here in Cyprus announced that its only option is the LNG terminal in Vasilikos, Larnaca. It's Limassol or Larnaca? Limassol. Okay. It's 30 minutes from here. And they work on that. They reached an agreement with Noble, Delek, and Avner. They signed a memorandum of understanding. But to construct an LNG terminal, you need investors. It's not the government of Cyprus that will find the money, but investor will come. So investor will come if there is availability of natural gas to be exploited.
Sure.
So you need to define the limit. So how many cubic feet? So, and the limit was defined as 5 TCF. Okay, now Noble just finished its drilling, and they announced that they found something between 3.5, 3.8 and 5.
An average of 5.
An average of 5. So from one. Yes. Noble, it's a huge,
Yes.
discovery. It's the third most important discovery in the region, by the way. But it's not enough for investors to, it's not viable for the time being. So Noble now is in a dilemma, because Noble made an investment worth of some millions of dollars. And as you know, Noble is not a large company; it's a medium company, and they would like to have their investment, yes, repaid soon. But they so they cannot wait forever. It's the same problem as in Israel. In Israel, Noble has a bigger problem than Cyprus. As you know, once a company goes to Israel, it cannot go to any other Middle East country.
Correct.
So Noble, in a way, is trapped between Cyprus and Israel. So Noble needs to find a solution fast. To my knowledge, Noble is firm with the LNG Cyprus terminal option concerning the Cyprus exploration. In Israel, they are in consultation with the government there. To my knowledge, the court will say yes to exports. This is the expectation, or going through the parliament. But even if the decision is not going through parliament, the government may make a decision, maybe not compulsory, going through the parliament for legitimization of the decision. So the situation around these, making revenues is not simple at all. It's a very complex situation. But if Israel decides tomorrow that it will channel part of its natural gas reserves to Cyprus, investors will be found within a limited period of time. So the plan was for exporting from the LNG terminal in Cyprus by 2020. So according to the IAE, the International Energy Agency, by 2020 the prices of natural gas would drop. So this means that the viability of the project will be will go astray if they delay further. And with these fracking enterprises, in the UK, for example, it's going on. In Poland, it was suspended for a while, but they may go ahead soon. In the Netherlands, they suspended that because of environmental concerns. By the way, RT is the new Greenpeace of the cable networks, but nevertheless, for obvious reasons, of course. Now, concerning your second question about the Turkish Cypriot claims, the government here made clear that the reserves belong to the state, neither to the Greek nor to the Turkish Cypriots. So revenues will be enjoyed by the citizens of Cyprus, and Turkish Cypriots, by the way, are citizens of Cyprus, and some 90,000 Turkish Cypriots have passports of the Republic of Cyprus. They may travel to Europe as European citizens and enjoy all the rights and privileges. They enjoy their pension rights and any other rights that citizens may enjoy here. But the administration in Turkey and the Turkish Cypriot leadership claims saying over the revenue distribution from now. Some European and other actors and the US push for an arrangement on that before the solution of the Cyprus problem. But there is a difference. Some European countries pushed for making energy part of negotiations in the Cyprus problem. The US did not say that. the US is very clear in recognizing the right of the Republic of Cyprus to exploit its natural resources. And because you know that in the US, the government acts most of the times in the interest of American companies. And this is a good practice in an open market economy, I think. So, but things around this monetization project are in flux. As I told you, Noble cannot wait forever in Cyprus or in Israel. And I heard from a source that in the past Noble even considered to sell its part to another company and leave Cyprus. But this was abandoned, I hope, forever. And maybe that's not accurate. But you know, a company cannot wait forever. Of course, Cyprus licensed 5 more other blocks to ENI, Total, and Kogas. And these companies will drill in 2014. Noble announced today that it will make 6 more appraisal drillings in 2014. But this will delay further the project of the LNG project. And some say this will give a leeway for negotiating an ultimate settlement of Cyprus problem. But I personally doubt that.
Are you saying that if it's just Cypriot gas, it's not enough to build a plant? But you need Israeli gas as well?
No. Potentially Cyprus has enough gas to run 2 or 3 trains in an LNG terminal. But the question is, when would this be available for being liquefied? They said that the roof is 5 TCF. We don't have confirmed announcement of this amount of
Roof or floor?
The floor.
TCF, by the way, is trillion.
Trillion cubic feet.
No,
What is it? Trillion
cubic feet.
Yes.
Less than it sounds.
Okay, but you know that will they wait until Total and Kogas and Eni will develop their fields? So, but this is just one scenario, one option. Okay, I don't say that if Israel does not contribute, that the LNG terminal will not go ahead. I said that this will depend the time of the construction. Okay, but my personal view is that Cyprus and Israel, like all other countries, should pursue their individual national policies on developing their fields and exploiting their fields. It's a mistake to forge a link between one another, because that will complicate things. And I think this is not in the intention of Israel whatsoever, to link its reserves with any other country's reserves. So this is part of the mythology around the natural gas enterprise, to some extent.
Is Israel not considering building its own LNG plant?
Yes and no. You know, actually the committee that was established to consider the options of exports proposed an LNG terminal. But to my knowledge, the current administration in Israel does not have that option on top of its priorities.
It could be a very big security risk.
Yes,
that's probably
for that reason maybe, and for other concerns. You know, the Greens in Israel have a level on the government, and you know this is a concern. This is another concern. You know, part of my research in the recent time was to understand. I'm trying to understand how monetization of natural gas and politics are intertwined. And you know, this is a very difficult enterprise, because the engineers and the companies, you know, focus on monetization. Governments focus on politics. So, but they find it difficult to communicate with one another, mainly because of ignorance. You know, in Cyprus, for example, this is a new area that you know, very few people have a very good understanding. So what we try to do is to develop an individual well understanding of the industry of natural gas, which is a huge industry and challenging and quite unpredictable in the short and long term. So I think that first of all we need to develop that knowledge before making decisions, because decision must be informed. I think Israel is in a much better position than Cyprus in that regard.
It's been working on it for much longer.
Yes, of course, and has, you know, the knowledge and the experience and the technological knowledge of all that. The lady wants to ask a question. For
Couple more questions.
Fracking is directional drilling and it's on land. And what we're talking about in terms of Israel is not fracking, as I understand it, it's deep sea development, which is a totally different animal altogether. It's offshoring, and that comes online in 5 to 7 years. But I was wondering if the Greens in Israel, this is what part of the question, do the Greens in Israel object to fracking as overall, just as an impediment to any development, or do they really object to Israel developing its own gas reserves to be independent and to sell to others? And the second part is, I was wondering if there were to be another Mavi Marmara today, how would Cyprus-Israel development or agreements, pacts, impact on possibly Turkey's response? Because I was astonished at the result that happened with Mavi Marmara 2 years ago. It was shocking that Israel paid reparations for an attack against her own shore. So how, speculating, would you say that might be different in the UN or in world news situations?
You know, I don't follow very closely, you know, politics in Israel. I'm not very well aware of the Green movement there. But what I know is that due to their pressure, the pipeline was planned to go onshore from Tamar, and that was abandoned in the end. And now they use that offshore platform to liquefy the natural gas. But you know, I'm not very well aware of their position on fracking.
George, let me say that fracking is not an option for Israel. They don't have.
Well, I said it's offshore, and that's
There is
where
nothing.
the gas is.
Israel, they don't have such a chance for fracking.
Right. Well, he used the term. I was just using it because he
No,
used
he
it.
was referring to other countries. He
No,
was
I'm
referring
referring to other
to Poland, to UK, to the States, and he was saying that this will push the prices of natural gas down.
Down, yes. and
So
it-
there is no option in Israel for fracking natural gas.
But offshore gas is being developed.
Offshore gas?
Yes, and that should be a it is massive.
2 points. One, Israel started getting Tamar field gas in March.
Since March.
6 months underway. It's
Developing faster than thought.
it's already happened.
It's really happened.
It's already
Yes.
happened. And the second point is that the Israelis have not paid compensation. They're arguing with the Turks for compensation.
But weren't they supposed to? Weren't they agreeing to it?
They agree in principle, but in fact, the talks are going very badly.
Well, isn't that good?
Yes. They haven't paid.
Yes, we have a couple more questions now. Yes, please.
You're taking one more question?
Yes, sure, I can take more questions. I don't mind.
Is there any worry is there any worry in Cyprus of giving air bases and military cooperation from Iran if Cyprus cooperates with Israel? Doesn't this make Cyprus a target?
Cyprus is a target anyway,
How come?
because of the presence of the British bases. Yeah. Actually, I made a survey over Turkey's potential accession to the EU, and in the context of my interviews with members of the Foreign Affairs department in England, one diplomat told me that even in 1991 they were concerned with a possible missile attack by Iraq in Cyprus, and this was also a concern during 2003 war. And now, recently, during the Syria crisis, the British developed their anti-ballistic systems for a possible attack by Syria and Cyprus, which is much closer than Iraq. So Cyprus is a target. So in that respect, what Cyprus needs to be concerned with is with its own anti-ballistic systems that it has, but are not that advanced that they should be. So I think this is an area where Cyprus and Israel may work together to improve Cyprus's defense security capabilities. And of course, there is an economic crisis on the island. These systems are quite expensive. Another option could be, which is, complex, Cyprus joining Partnership for Peace or even NATO. And in that respect, under Article 5 will be provided with the anti-ballistic systems of NATO. But this will be rejected by Turkey. So Cyprus will need to pursue, individual national means of defense, because the missile systems that Syria or Iraq or Iran have are not that accurate, so they may target the bases and they may hit a city. They may hit Larnaca instead of Ayos Nigolas, which is
of course
very nearby, the Gaya base. So Cyprus is a target anyway. What Cyprus must be concerned with, and I had a briefing on that, is on unconventional threats. And I mean, terrorist threats. So, Cyprus needs to develop its ability to, counter terrorist ability and means, because it enters a new area which is quite unknown.
Yes.
So, new friends bring new challenges. Of course.
Welcome to the Middle East.
So I totally subscribe. What I say is that Cyprus ultimately met its destiny, which is Middle East. It belongs to the Middle East.
So you got the gas, you got the gas.
Wonderful.
That's wonderful.
I'm just to be unfair with you.
On the gas question, how much natural gas does Cyprus use now, and is there any stipulation?
0.
Oh, really? But
Cyprus is dependent 95% on crude oil?
It's crude oil, HFO, heavy fuel oil and diesel, which is very expensive and very
Diesel.
So they'd be able to convert to natural gas, probably.
yes.
Yeah, there's another technical aspect here that our engines that produce electricity are not, they cannot use natural gas, all of them, only 2 out of the 5.
Almost 60% of the existing power generation they can convert very easily.
Okay.
So the power generation plants you're talking about.
We have modern power generation. Well, as you might know, some time ago we had a great explosion on our modest power generation plant. Now that has been rebuilt, taking into account that we will burn natural gas.
Yeah, one last question there. I'm not an expert on natural gas or electricity here. Mr. Casino will be here tomorrow and ask him as many questions as you would like. I look more into politics and security.
I'm just thinking of this bilateral signing with Egypt or Lebanon or Israel. How does that factor? What kind of concerns do you have with the island still being partially occupied with Turkey? And how is that learn now they got that much of the island, maybe after a few more exploration, they might decide to go further down and claim more territory. I mean, shouldn't that be resolved first before signing those bilateral?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I personally I don't like the idea of opening a new round of negotiations right now over the Cyprus problem. I think that the government here should consider other things as priorities, because entering new round of negotiations will lead nowhere. So I think that now we should change the priorities in foreign policy. And maybe we don't like the status quo here, of course, but there are some aspects of the status quo which are in the advantage of the Republic of Cyprus. And I think that the Greek Cypriot community should consider entering negotiations with Turkey Cypriot, actually with Turkey, when its power position, negotiating position will be improved. So I totally agree with Daniel that we become stronger now, and we're much stronger than Turkey. And this is a paradox, that the only actor in the region who made a consent to Turkey was the government of Cyprus with no exchange. I don't know if you heard that our president made an agreement with Turkey that in the new round of negotiations, the Greek Cypriot negotiator will go to Turkey. The Turkish Cypriot negotiator will go to Greece. In that respect, there will be, Turkey and Greece will be involved in the process in an indirect way.
But they'll be at wrong places. They won't be able to have a meeting.
Yes. So there are a number of problematic aspects of that development. So what I would like to say, or I'm trying to say, is that, I think that we need to come to terms with the reality, which is quite difficult and dangerous. I totally agree with Daniel. It's very dangerous. A new word that it's unexplored terrain for us. So we have to be extremely careful and try. What we can learn from Israel is to develop a sense of national security and national interest in the way that will make us more secure, and to follow the instinct of survival than follow the instinct of idealism that we'll find a momentum and make agreement and be happy here, Greeks and Turks, So I think that this idealism that in Europe they realized in the past that how dangerous idealism, utopianism is. I think that we have to come to terms with reality, and reality is hard and difficult, but it's better to live in a real world than in a fantastic utopian world. So I think that's my final remark, and I would like to thank you for being here tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it.